What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our team mini series. Today we are talking about the Carolina Panthers and their fantasy relevant players. They have a new sheriff in town as far as quarterback and head coach, actually. But their quarterback is now Teddy Bridgewater, coming over from their division rival, the New Orleans Saints, where he filled in for a couple of games last year when Drew Brees went down. Pretty successful last year too, in his minimal starts that he had. He wasn't the main reason why Michael Thomas was able to break the receiving record, but he kind of helped string it along, so he didn't really miss a beat with it. I have him. They got Christian McCaffrey there, so I don't really think they're going to be throwing the ball a lot, even though they have a couple talented wide receivers there. I got him at about 3,000 passing yards, which is a little low. I think I'm going to be moving that around a little bit, but right now 3,000 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 200 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. So it all equals out to about 261 points overall, but I definitely think I'm going to be adjusting that a little bit more, especially because I really love DJ Moore. They got Christian McCaffrey, who's going to catch a lot of ball. He's going to catch about half of those yards out of the backfield himself. And then, yeah, I like this offense, but that's where my standings are, or that's where my projection is right now for him.
Yeah, so I've talked about Teddy Bridgewater a few times, and I know there's a lot of Teddy Bridgewater lovers out there, but to me, I just think that he's a conservative quarterback who's going to manage a game. I really like him in Joe Brady's system. If you read up on Joe Brady's system, it's a really simplistic offense with a lot of simple route concepts, so really right up DJ Moore's alley. So I'm excited to see that Teddy Bridgewater DJ Moore connection, but I think it's going to be a lot of dink and dunk West Coast style kind of offense. So last season, Teddy did have the least amount of attempted air yards, and that's pretty similar to how the Saints offense runs. Even Drew Brees isn't really known for airing it down the field. And I think the Saints offense is actually pretty comparable to what you're going to see from Joe Brady in the NFL. So when Teddy started last year, he averaged the 25th most points when he was with the Saints. It was super underwhelming. He had one game that kind of blew it all up. He had 4 touchdowns against the Buccaneers, whose defense in the beginning part of the season was horrendous, and that's really nothing to be impressed by. I think everybody threw for 4 touchdowns against the Bucs defense in the early part of the season. So overall, I think it's going to be a really conservative offense. I don't think it's going to be overly fantasy friendly for Teddy Bridgewater. I expect a lot of his passes to be short routes to DJ Moore and I think Curtis Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. So I'm not overly excited about it. If you play in a 2 QB league, I think he's a solid option as your second quarterback, but I think his upside is going to be limited by his conservative nature.
Yeah, he's definitely a sleeper pick in redraft leagues, later round sleeper pick. If you want to load up on offensive talent elsewhere, then you could probably grab a Teddy Bridgewater later. But quarterback is pretty deep, so you might be able to go elsewhere too. As far as his backups go, Will Greer, who was a third round pick last year, and then they ended
And
up signing PJ Walker
yeah,
out of from the Houston Roughnecks of the XFL. So, PJ Walker he was having an MVP type season before the XFL halted.
no,
So, if Bridgewater goes down, who even knows who's going to come in and
PJ Walker's the
take his
future.
place? Yeah.
I mean,
um,
Teddy Bridgewater, so everyone talks about he signed a 4-year deal. There's actually an opt out after 2 seasons, and I still firmly believe that Matt Rule, he has to want to go get his guy. He did coach PJ Walker at Temple, but I don't think he's actually the future.
and I'm seeing a lot of um, standings predictions where they have the Panthers only at like 3 wins, four
Yeah,
wins,
that's
which would put
stupid.
them at the beginning or near the beginning of the draft for Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. But I just don't see that happening.
I don't know.
But if it does, then they got their quarterback of the future right there. But I guess we'll see after the season ends. Moving on to the running backs, obviously Christian McCaffrey for the past 2 years has been the best running back in the league. Even ahead of Saquon Barkley, ahead of guys like Zeke. I don't think he's your consensus number one. If you poll 100 people, maybe 80% of them will say Christian McCaffrey. The other 20 will say Barkley. But so he's definitely your top two pick. There's no doubt about it. That's in 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues. He's going in the top two. Um, After him, There's not really any guys that I trust. We talked about it when we talked about the Giants with Barkley. It's even less talent behind McCaffrey. So if McCaffrey goes down, this whole offense goes down. But I'm not drafting his handcuff. I'm not going out and spending all my fab on his handcuff. If you want to talk about them, you're more than welcome to. But I mean, it's McCaffrey and nobody else for me.
Yeah, I mean, we gave the same warning for the Giants with Barkley, but I mean, don't go crazy drafting any of McCaffrey's backups. I mean, even on volume alone, I know a lot of people get excited, like, oh man, he's going to be getting all the touches. Honestly, you don't even know that, because if Christian McCaffrey went down, it would probably be some sort of weird split between Reggie Bonifant and Jordan Scarlett, Mike Dave. I mean, we don't really know. So people always tend to run out and say, oh, I remember that with the Giants last year. Everyone's saying, oh, I'm going to go grab Wayne Gallman. He's going to be a solid RB2. I mean, there's a reason that he's a backup. He's not meant to carry a big workload. So I think this would be a committee if McCaffrey went down. And you already mentioned it. I won't drag it on too long, but McCaffrey's a consensus top 2 pick. For me, it's a coin flip. You can't really go wrong either way. I mean, he's a generational talent. I will say in Dynasty League, start to keep your eye out for big offers if you have Christian McCaffrey. The reason I say that is his volume is intense, and I don't think he's going to have another 10 years in this league. We may be looking at, and that's just fact. If you look at any running back, they tend to have 5, even the greatest running backs of all time, they have a peak of about 5 to 7 years. So once we start getting there in 2 years or so, keep your eye out. If somebody wants to pay the farm for Christian McCaffrey, I would let them.
Yeah, exactly. He's a hard sell. Well, he's not really a hard sell. He's an easy sell. Everybody wants him, but you have to have the right compensation coming back your way. But people are willing to overpay for him. So if you could get a nice compensation back, then definitely. Obviously, we all know that running back shelf life is not what it used to be, and it's not long at all. Um, I want to dip a little bit into the offensive line a little bit here. The whole left side of the offensive line is brand new. They
Yeah.
got left tackle Russell Okung over from the Chargers. Matt Paradis, who I think was the top the top free agent center. This was last year. It was between him and Mitch Morse, and then John Miller is their new left guard there. They still have Greg Little, who they took in the second round of last year's draft, that could come in, and he could see some time on the right side. He could come over or come in and replace Russell Okung if he were to go down from injury, because they still have Taylor Morton over there on the right side too. So they got some depth behind their main starting five. Greg Little is a really good tackle, but that's going to help create some passing lanes for Teddy Bridgewater, create some rushing lanes for Christian McCaffrey, and hopefully help out these wide receivers with keeping Bridgewater upright.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the offensive line is pretty comparable to last season. They just swapped Russell Okung for Trey Turner, so it's a solid offensive line, nothing spectacular, but I think they're a league average offensive line.
All right, and then moving on to the wide receivers, they got a trio there that is they're pretty solid. I mean, they're an underrated trio. I'd probably put them as far as the three guys go. I'd probably put them in the top 10 to 12 if we're ranking all three. DJ Moore is their top guy. He's one of my favorite wide receivers. I absolutely love him. I'm going to try to get him as much as I can. He's like a late second, early third round guy. Curtis Samuel is another one. I'm more looking at DJ Moore, but Curtis Samuel is a nice consolation. We actually have one of our writers has an article that he's working on that he's I'll just explain it a little bit, but he's looking at two guys from the same team and looking at where their ADPs are. And if he likes the second guy from the team, he'll address somewhere else with his draft pick and then grab the second guy because his ADP is a little lower. So this will be the case, same case in this situation where you like DJ Moore, you like Curtis Samuel. You could get somebody else where you could get DJ Moore and then grab Curtis Samuel a couple rounds later. So that's not bad. And then Robbie Anderson, they got over from the Jets in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I love DJ Moore as well. Is in terms of where he's ranked, I've seen it all over the board. I I mean, currently he's anywhere from 14 to the low 20s. I mean, it's really everywhere. Even when you look at our rankings from all of our admins, it's all over the place. I have him inside my top 10 actually. So I think
Good
last
man.
season yet. Yeah, I mean, I love him. I already mentioned previously. I think him and Teddy Bridgewater's style match up perfectly, and even further, Joe Brady's offensive scheme should work perfectly for them. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Michael Thomas actually had a lot of success under Teddy Bridgewater. Not as much as Drew Brees, but Drew Brees is Drew Brees. So I think DJ Moore could have a Michael Thomas kind of impact. Is he going to have that many catches? I'm not saying that. I'm saying it could be a similar situation where you see DJ Moore with over 100 receptions, 12, 1,300 yards, not a ton of touchdowns. I don't expect him to be a huge red zone threat, but I like DJ Moore a lot. I think he's going to be a high volume kind of player, which is exactly what you need in a PPR league. I already mentioned Kenny Galladay being one of my underdogs as being the number one overall wide receiver this year. DJ Moore would be my other underdog to be the number one wide receiver overall. That's currently not being drafted as so I like him a lot. Curtis Samuel, same thing. He's more of a short to intermediate route runner, has a little more speed than DJ Moore, but he's currently being drafted as the 66th wide receiver overall. And I mentioned I think this is going to be an offense that focuses a lot on short passes. Once again, right up Curtis Samuel's alley. So 66 is a really nice value for him. Robbie Anderson going right around the same place as Curtis Samuel, depending where you look. They're drafted around the same time. He had a lot of success with the Jets. He's finally not a number one wide receiver somewhere. He never should have been in the first place, but he's also reunited with Matt Rule, so that's just kind of an interesting side note that Matt Rule went out and got him. Robbie Anderson played at Temple, so Robbie Anderson's more of a downfield threat, though. He'll stretch the field. It makes a lot of sense why they signed him. You have DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel running short to intermediate routes. Robbie Anderson can stretch out the field for you a little bit. So I don't expect him to have a huge season. He'll have some games where he gives you a 60, 70-yard touchdown because that's the kind of wide receiver he is, but I don't expect him to be consistent.
Yeah, and outside of those three, it's not really a lot of other
Yep.
receivers that you want. I mean,
Farrell Cooper.
for the most part, they're going to run in their heavy pass sets. They're going to run those three plus Ian Thomas and Christian McCaffrey. So they didn't really grab any in the draft this year. They got a couple undrafted free agents like every team does, but they didn't really grab any in the draft that was heavy with wide receivers. So nobody to really worry about. And then
They didn't
speaking,
draft any offensive players in the draft.
yeah, they went all defense in the draft, and then their only offensive rookies are undrafted ones. Ian Thomas is your tight end here. Greg Olson is gone off to Seattle now, so Ian Thomas takes over, and I think he could have I think he could have a good year too. He's getting a lot of hype. I've seen a lot of sleeper articles about him just throughout different sites and different pages that I read and subscribe to, and I think that all for good reason too. We always talk about, and it seems to come up in almost every show that we do, but quarterback loves a tight end, a newer quarterback loves a tight end. So the whole offense is not the whole offense because the wide receivers and McCaffrey are still the same, but like with the offensive coordinator and the new coach and the new quarterback, it's okay. Let's get the tight end involved, and Ian Thomas I think is a guy to get. He's a guy to get late if you can.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Thomas is a very athletic tight end, first of all. So, I mean, he has a great speed. He has very solid hands and the limited action that he's seen so far in the NFL. And I keep talking about Joe Brady's system. I look at schemes a lot because I think it's directly relevant to how players perform fantasy wise. So, I mean, last season, when you look at what Joe Brady did at LSU, he had Steven Sullivan and Thad Moss, who both had really nice seasons there. So you could see a similar situation for Ian Thomas. I think he's kind of getting buried behind, and I've mentioned this several times, but this tight end class is very deep. He's currently going around tight end 20, and honestly, I can't really validate him going any higher. There's so much upside and so much potential at the tight end position, and I would throw Ian Thomas in there as well. I'm definitely not drafting him as my first tight end, but if you're in a very deep league and you have bench spots for a second or third tight end, I think he's a really interesting name to keep an eye on, and we'll see what he does in that offense.
All right, so some solid players there on the offensive side of the ball. Moving on to their kicker, Graham Gano is mean, he's been around for a long time. He's still kicking field goals. I think he's got, and you mentioned it in one of our other episodes. I forgot which one we were doing, but how you like NFC South kickers. There's a lot of
Mm.
points. There's a lot of points in that division. Even if you take who could be the worst team, which might be Carolina, with all the acquisitions that the other teams made, those in division games are just they're crazy. Like 45-40 scores
Yep.
and 35-32 scores. So you know your kicker's getting involved. Graham Gano is as good as any as far as kicking the field goals. So I think that he's a guy that could be targeted late in drafts.
Yeah, and Graham Gano missed a big chunk of last season, and Joey Sly slid in there, and he was actually a top 10 kicker. Most people don't even probably remember Joey Sly kicking, but he was the 10th overall kicker last year, and Graham Gano is much more accomplished, a very accurate kicker, not a great leg. But yeah, I mean, I love kickers in that division. At least 8 home games a year in their home stadium. They're getting solid weather. And then when you go outside, I mean, you're playing another chunk of games versus your division rival. So you're looking at, 12 games or so where you're not going to have to worry about weather conditions depending on what other or out of division games you have. So I like Graham Gano. I think he's a safe option as a top 10 kicker in that division.
And then just the current depth chart right now shows DJ Moore as the kick and punt returner. I'd
Yep.
imagine that's probably going to change,
Yeah.
maybe with a Pharaoh Cooper or Seth Roberts, because they don't want to have him take all those hits anymore, even though there's not a lot of returns anymore.
Yep.
Get somebody else back there so you could preserve your number one receiver. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, this is where they spent all their draft capital. 100% of their draft capital was spent on defense. Derek Brown was their first round pick at nose tackle. As far as fantasy relevancy goes, I don't know how much I like it. I don't even know if I like it at all because he's a good player. He's going to help this team out. He's going to help them win games essentially, but I don't. He's not going to help you win fantasy games. He's not a fantasy point producer. The biggest guy here, and Luke Kuechly is gone. He decided to retire on us. Brian Burns, I think, is going to be your biggest IDP from this team. Shaq Thompson has a little bit of value too, but Brian Burns, he was a first round pick in 2019, linebacker there. He's going to get a lot of tackles, a couple turnovers. I mean, overall, this defense it's solid. It's not one that I would probably draft. I wouldn't trust him as a whole DST, but Brian Burns is a guy that he's probably the only one that I would probably touch from this defense.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't draft them as a whole either. We already mentioned they spent all their draft capital. I mean, that means it's a very young defense, and there's going to be inconsistencies. Not to mention, we were just talking about how much this division likes to score points. That means no bueno for your defense. So there's a few individual names I like. I personally really like Derek Brown, even as a rookie. I think long term he is an Aaron Donald type of player. Type of player. He's not Aaron Donald,
Oh,
just
so
for the
he's Aaron
record.
Donald.
But Aaron Donald, he's had 20 sack seasons. But I think Derek Brown, he's playing nose tackle. But I think that long term, you're looking at a guy that's going to consistently get you 10 plus sacks a year. And I mean, because he's a great pass rusher and he stuffs the run. So I love Derek Brown. If you're in a deep IDP league, I would consider drafting him this season, just because not a lot of linemen and specifically nose tackles get sacks. So he could have some value depending on how your league is formatted. You already mentioned Brian Burns. Really quietly had a nice rookie season, 7.5 sacks last year. I think all the attention went to Nick Bosa in the season that he had, but there was other guys. Max Crosby from the Raiders had a nice rookie season. So there's some other guys that went under the radar. Another rookie that I like there is one of the top safeties in this year's draft, Jeremy Chin. Is going to be their starting strong safety. I think he's going to be all over the field picking up tackles, so I like him as an under the radar safety if you need a safety specifically. Linebacking core, besides Brian Burns, who's going to be playing on the outside for them, they have Shaq Thompson, who you already mentioned. He had over 100 tackles last season, a safe bet to do that again. And then they also have Tahir Whitehead, who is their starting one of their starting middle linebackers, and he's had 4 straight years of 100 tackles. That's great consistency. So if you're looking for a guy, plug and play, going to put up solid numbers within the top 15 of IDPs, he's a really safe pick.
All right, so that about does it for the Panthers. Final thoughts on them. This division is very deep. It's a lot of offensive talent. Tom Brady comes over to the Bucks. Obviously, Drew Brees is there for another year in New Orleans, and then Matt Ryan. He's a couple years from having an MVP season, and he's got one of the strongest offenses in the league. So it's going to be a lot of points in this division. I could still see. I don't see the Panthers quite making the jump up to third or second in this division just yet. They're gonna be in a lot of close games. Their defense isn't quite where it needs to be to make any kind of playoff push or playoff run or anything like that. I mean, I don't see them being 3-13 like some projections are. I could
No.
see them being somewhere like a 6-10, 7-9 team.
Yep, I agree. I have them at 6 wins. They had 5 last season, so not a huge move forward. But I mean, this team is very young. Teams that are this young typically don't perform in year one. They have a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, a new system. There's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished above the Falcons, but I'm not going to discount Matt Ryan because I think Matt Ryan by himself will probably propel them above the Panthers. But yeah, this is a tough division to predict. I have the Saints winning it, and I really think they're going to bring home one last Super Bowl for Drew Brees. And they've been through a lot of heartbreak in the playoffs. So I believe a lot in that. And you see that all the time. I mean, when the Ravens won with Ray Lewis, I think I solely believe in guys rallying around legends like that. So I think Drew Brees has one last run in him. The Buccaneers are going to be a talented team that are going to make the playoffs. So, yeah, Panthers, Falcons at the bottom, and I would have the Panthers at the bottom with 6 wins.
All right. So until the next episode, we'll see you guys again.